Hello, my name's Shane, and today I'm going to be talking to you a bit about Canvas, the new LMS that we're going to be using here on campus. The first thing I want to talk about is grades area. You're likely already familiar with the grades area in D2L. The setup in Canvas is very similar. You can see the various assignments go across the top, and the student name is on the left-hand side. Here you can see a test student that has a submission and a few grades entered. In D2L, if we go into the Enter Grades area, you'll see that there currently are not any grades or any student. And that's because in D2L, there was no test student for you to try things out with. In Canvas, by going in, viewing it as a student, and actually taking a quiz or submitting an item to a Dropbox, it'll populate this test student for you, and it'll give you something to work with right away. So that's a handy feature in Canvas that was absent in D2L. Digging a little bit deeper, we'll see that a lot of the things that you're used to doing are still here. So we can take a look at this item that was submitted, and you can see that the speed grader was used, and that there was some feedback provided. We can update the grade straight away, or we can move on to other areas and enter grades. If we click directly on the name of the item, it'll take us back out into Canvas to where that item is. If instead we click on this dropdown, we can view assignment details, enter the speed grader area, message students who, which allows us to send messaging to students who haven't submitted yet or have gotten a certain score. We can set a default grade. So in the example of an in-class assignment that is participation-based, you can set many grades at once. And Canvas even has a curve grades option. In D2L, if you wanted to curve grades, you'd have to go in and do this manually or assign an extra credit assignment and give points that way. But in Canvas, we can just go ahead and curve. It is worth being aware that once you curve a grade, there is no option to uncurve it. So be a bit careful when you're using this at first. There's also mute assignment. If students have their announcements set up so that they get a text message or an email anytime you make a change to the gradebook, you can mute this assignment, which means that they won't get that messaging. Then, when you're done and you've finished grading it for everyone, you can unmute it, and then everyone will get the messaging at once. This is handy in those cases where it takes several days to go through and hand grade some larger assignments, and you don't want some students finding out that someone else already got their feedback and they're waiting on theirs. The assignments area in Canvas houses both quizzes and what we were used to thinking of as Dropbox items. If we take a look in D2L, we previously had a quizzes button and a Dropbox button. Since these are just types of assignments, Canvas houses them together. You can tell what kind of assignment it is by coming in and taking a look at the icon. The little piece of paper indicates that there's some kind of submission that a student can make, whereas the rocket ship indicates that this is a quiz that they will take. As an instructor, you'll be able to come down the side and actually find a quizzes button where you could potentially go in and create quizzes. If we do this, you'll see that the plus quiz button brings us into something that looks very much like what you're used to seeing in D2L. For the quiz type, you can make this practice quiz, a graded survey, or an ungraded survey. This is a nice change of pace from D2L, where the option was just making it graded or ungraded. If you made it graded, you had to create that item in the gradebook and then tie the two together. To be ungraded, you just didn't create an item in the gradebook. The biggest issue with this in D2L was when you would go to create a quiz and you would forget to tie that item to the gradebook. So for example, if we edit in the assessments area, you can see that this one was set up to automatically grade and automatically send that grade to the gradebook. It's very common for instructors to forget to check one of these boxes, meaning that grades would not be sent to the gradebook after a student completed a quiz. In Canvas, that's taken care of for you simply by selecting the graded quiz. It'll automatically create the item in the gradebook and link it. You'll notice some other options that you're used to seeing, things like shuffling answers, adding a time limit, allowing multiple attempts, and feedback. In D2L, we'd have to adjust those submission views, whereas in Canvas, it's located right here. So many of those options that you're used to seeing are still right here. As for actually creating the questions, there's a Questions tab. If you'd like to group your questions, you can do that. And you'll see that it tells you to pick a number of questions. So just like in D2L, when you'd go in and create a random question folder, create a random section, that's what this is doing here. If you tell it to pick fewer questions than the number that end up in this category, then it will randomize those. From here, you'll see that we can select what kind of question we want. You have a place to add your question and the various changes you can make to the way that question is laid out. In the answers area, Canvas always defaults to the first answer being the correct answer to the question. If you want to change that, you can do that manually. Or you can also just make sure that you've clicked the checkbox so that the answers are randomized. If there are too many possible answers here, we can delete one, and if there aren't enough, we can add another. Back in the assignments area, you may notice that there is a quiz/test button. This is in beta currently, and it's something that Canvas is working on. It's supposed to be a more user-friendly way to go about creating an item. For now, existing quizzes do not import into this tool, but that'll change as they clean it up. As is, I just wanted to make sure that you are aware it exists, as it will become a standard in the future. If we add assignment, you'll see that there's various assignment types. Quiz is not in here, so to create that quiz, we do need to be in the quizzes area. So even though students will see quizzes housed in assignments, you cannot create a quiz through the assignments area. What you can do is do problem sets, posters, journals, checkups, and imported assignments. If you think of these as similar to the Dropbox area in D2L, we can create an assignment. We can decide whether or not this counts towards a final grade. And we can even decide what kind of submissions we will allow. If you do online, this will link to the gradebook. If this is something you expect them to hand in class, you'll notice that the type of submissions allowed go away. If this is similar to something that we would create in D2L, we'd want to allow for submissions here in this course. If you want to make it a group assignment or allow for peer reviewing, you can do that at the click of a button. The instructor for this course was not using attendance as part of their grade. If that's something you do, or even if you just like to keep track of attendance, that's an option that you'll be able to add. If I come into the settings area and take a look at the navigation tab, attendance is one of the options that I can add to the navigation bar. You'll see that attendance is now here. In D2L, it was a bit difficult to get to attendance. So you'd have to come into your Edit Course area and then find the attendance tool. In D2L, you needed to create a register that listed every course date that you had planned to use attendance for. In Canvas, once in your attendance tool, it uses the calendar, and you can merely move through the days and mark people as present or absent. In this course, we only have that one test student, so it isn't very interesting to look at. But the options are here, and you'd merely go through and change a drop-down to mark someone as present or absent or tardy. If you're using attendance, it will add an attendance piece to your gradebook. So if you don't want this to be worth points, or if you want to adjust how many points it's worth, you will have to go into grades and make sure that the attendance is marked to an appropriate amount of points for your course. If you make heavy use of the calendar in your course, I think you'll like the way it works in Canvas. If we come into Settings and take a look at the course calendar, you'll see the calendar for just this course. We can see the calendars for all courses you're associated with by clicking on the calendar tool here, but as you're working in one course, you'll probably just want to adjust in that one course. So doing that through Settings will allow you to look at them one at a time. You can see that there's a few things populated here. This is based on due dates that have been set in the course itself. You can see that this month is pretty blank, but there is one item that I've set as a due date. We can add more by going back into our course and going to either quizzes or assignments and adding due dates to other quizzes. If I go into this microfilaments quiz and edit it, I can scroll to the bottom where the due date is, and by just clicking on the calendar and then saying done, it'll add to the calendar. You'll notice that I'm leaving this time blank currently. When I do that, it defaults to 11:59 p.m. If you'd like a different time, you can fill it in there when you select the due date. When I go back to my course calendar, you'll see that by just adding the due date, the item has been added to the calendar here. If I change my mind and need this to be due on a different day, I can simply click and drag. Heading back into my course, we'll see that my quiz has been updated with the new due date. And sure enough, the new due date is here.